Welcome to the Mental Health Series. This is Session 4, Communication Without Conflict. In this session, we'll explore interpersonal communication and creating emotional safety when there's conflict. To be clear, this isn't about avoiding conflict, it's about learning to grow deeper in relationships during times of conflict. This is probably the most difficult tool in the Team CBT toolbox to use. Not because it's difficult to understand, but because it requires a shift in perspective that most of us just don't want to do. In today's discussion, I'll start with a brief introduction. Then I'll share what we mean by good and bad communication. Then I'll introduce a model for achieving good communication called the EAR model, EAR. Lastly, we'll practice using a tool called the 5 Secrets of Effective Communication. This program is designed to be an interactive experience. I'll share the tool and then give you some time to work through the worksheets. You can do this individually or as a group. My name is Chris Guznicek. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I'm a partner and a counselor at Flower Mound Counseling. I work with individuals, couples, and groups, as well as teams. I focus heavily on Team CBT tools, which are developed by Dr. David Burns, and I'm going to share one of those with you today. We are going to define good communication as communication that drives deeper connection through understanding and respect. This is easy to do when we feel love and acceptance from another. But what about situations when we really want to get our point across? Maybe during an argument when we think that we are right, or when someone is suffering and we just want to help them feel better, and we think we know what's best. How about when someone has a different value or belief system than I have? Today in our society, it's more popular to argue with others that don't share my perspective than it is to be understanding. This technique begins with a change of heart, a willingness to set my own ego aside and be willing to understand someone else's world. It requires curiosity and maybe sometimes vulnerability. This shift in perspective, the change in heart, is the hardest part of this technique. But if I want to improve communication, I have to focus on my own part, even though I may really want to focus on what the other person is doing wrong. It's important to understand that this concept of good versus bad communication is not a concept of what is right or wrong. It's a choice. It's a choice to grow deeper in a relationship with someone else. Once I make that choice, then I can look at trying to establish what we talk about when we call it good communication. So let's begin by defining good and bad communication in the context of deepening a relationship. Good communication is focusing on deepening understanding between two people. We do this with empathy for the other person's thoughts and feelings, being assertive with our own feelings, and being respectful. This is the EAR model, EAR, which stands for empathy, assertiveness, and respect. What's really amazing and can be life-changing is realizing that the most difficult conversations can actually lead to deeper connection with someone. When we learn how to safely and effectively engage in those difficult conversations, our relationships can just blossom. We're going to think of bad communication really as the absence of those 3 things: empathy, assertiveness, and respect. Bad communication, which comes much more naturally in moments of conflict, comes from a place of protecting my ego and maybe needing to be right. It happens like this. Let's say someone criticizes you. What is the first thing you think of? When you focus on defensiveness, this is bad communication because you're focused on defending yourself instead of fully understanding the other's need. If you disagree with someone on a topic and you are thinking about your own perspective without fully understanding the others, this is another example of bad communication. And once again, we all do these things. But what's happening is there are literally roadblocks keeping us from connecting with someone when we're unwilling to pause our own ego and hear what the other person is saying. Bad communication shows up in many forms, such as focusing on being right, blaming, defensiveness, trying to fix things, putting the other person down. None of these responses allow you to understand the other person, and they don't allow for deeper understanding. Other examples of bad communications are problem solving, helping, giving advice. You may wonder what is wrong with these responses. Once again, they're providing a single perspective without allowing for any understanding or empathy of the other person. In essence, what you're doing is you're skipping that step of understanding and you're trying to jump right into problem solving. And that's something that just doesn't feel good to the other person. In conflict, we tend to skip that most important step, that understanding. We tend to talk at each other. And the truth is, no one wants to be wrong. As I often tell couples, it doesn't matter who is right and who is wrong the vast majority of the time, because we usually don't even argue about what really matters anyway. What we need to do is get to the why in a safe way, why we're having these conversations. That is what this technique is all about. It's about providing a safe way to talk about the things that really matter. So now we're going to expand on that ear model and take a look at 5 very specific steps within it. These are called the 5 secrets to effective communication. It's a technique that was developed by Dr. David Burns. As you can see, the tenets of good communication are built in with empathy, assertiveness, and respect. The tool is not to be used like a script or an order of things to say. These are just really important pieces to try to include as you respond to someone with good communication. We will take a closer look at each step now. Empathy includes 3 steps: the disarming technique, thought and feeling empathy, and inquiry. Assertiveness includes expressing how you feel. And then respect involves affirming the other person. So let's start by taking a look at the disarming technique. The disarming technique. This sounds like you're doing battle, but it's actually the opposite. It's disarming the emotion out of a situation. This technique is to respond to the other person by acknowledging universal truth in what they just said. And no matter how much you agree or disagree with the actual words that they said, you can always find truth underneath what they are saying. Find something that is actually truthful that both of you can agree on. When people are emotional or in pain, they exaggerate and they say things that they don't even mean. This technique is really about listening for and responding to what they actually mean. Those words that they're saying may be exaggerated, but there's always truth underneath them. If you can get the words out of your mouth, "You're right," you can usually acknowledge something true in what the other said. What you're trying to do is you're trying to avoid being defensive or correcting the other person, or even jumping into fixing what the other person is dealing with. This technique reminds me of a modern Japanese martial art called Aikido. Aikido was developed as a synthesis of martial studies, philosophy, and religious beliefs to create an art that practitioners could use to defend themselves while also protecting their attacker from injury. It was often translated as the way of unifying life with energy. Like Aikido, we're trying to unite with somebody instead of separating ourselves from them. We're trying not to get into a debate or an argument, and we're trying to come to understanding. And this is a very positive first step. So let's try a couple of examples. Get your pause button ready. I recommend that as we go through the examples, you pause and try each one. Practice is the only way to start learning these techniques. So let's say your spouse says to you, "You're always late and I'm sick of waiting for you." Now let's assume that you aren't always late, but you have been the last couple of days because you've been working on a large project at work. You're kind of tired and exhausted, and you're frustrated with your wife saying this to you. Think about how you might want to respond naturally. Would you want to defend yourself? It might be hard not to, but where would that lead? It might lead to arguing about whether or not you're always late. That seems like a silly thing to argue about. You might try to respond using the disarming technique. Go ahead and give it a try. Pause the session, give it a try, and then press play. You might say something like, "It's true I'm late, and you have the right to be angry." Or you might say something like, "You know what, you're right, I've been late all week." By simply acknowledging truth in what your spouse said, what you're doing is you're actually unifying the conversation and starting a conversation, and it's a good first step into talking about it versus literally turning it into an argument or a debate about whether or not you're always late or whether or not you should be frustrated with it or anything like that. Let's go ahead and try another one. How about this? Let's say your boss says to you, "This proposal stinks. What were you daydreaming when you wrote it?" Go ahead and hit pause and give this one a try. So, as you think about this one, once again, it doesn't make it appropriate that your boss says something to you in this tone or in this way, but clearly there is some truth in what they're saying. So, you might respond to that truth, maybe saying something like, "It sounds like I really missed the boat on this proposal. Could you tell me what you liked and disliked about it?" Notice once again, what you're doing is you're trying to respond to what the other person is really saying versus responding to maybe an emotional statement or a tone. You're trying to hear and respond to what really matters. In a way, you're listening for the music underneath the words, if you think about it that way. So, the second skill within empathy is learning how to have verbal thought and feeling empathy. Sometimes I have clients who say they just don't have empathy, as if it's a personality trait. Empathy is learned, and the good news is that it's never too late to learn the skills of verbalizing empathy. So, the two types of empathy we're going to talk about here is thought empathy and feeling empathy. The skill of thought empathy is summarizing what the other person is saying or what they've said. This sounds easy to do, but in the middle of an elevated situation, it can be really challenging to focus on what the other person is saying. You might say something as simple as, "Okay, what I'm hearing you saying is," and then try to summarize back what they've just said. It's a really great way to slow a conversation down and to accomplish a couple of things. One, you're actually validating what you think you're hearing them say. Two, you're actually making them feel good because they're feeling understood. And three, and this is really interesting, you're giving them a chance to actually correct what they said and give you a more true statement, which is really, really helpful. Feeling empathy, on the other hand, is slightly different. It's acknowledging how the other person feels. This is a really critical step to deepening the connection. Now, what you may be thinking is, well, the person isn't telling me how they feel. So what you're doing is you're not telling them how they feel, but you're trying to tell them that they might feel a certain way. You're actually, I mean, you're really doing your best guess. Um, what I find is when we're willing to be a little bit vulnerable with each other and acknowledge feelings, we really connect at a deeper level. And you're not going to offend someone by getting it wrong. They'll simply correct you. You might say something like, "I can imagine that you feel whatever it might be, sad or anxious or frustrated about that." Because what they're going to do is they're either going to say, "Well, yes, I do feel frustrated," or they're going to say, "Well, I'm not frustrated, but I'm just kind of annoyed by it." And look at that. Now you actually know how they feel, which is really, really helpful when you're trying to understand each other. Inquiry is the last step in empathy. It's gently asking for more details. It's being genuinely curious to understand the other person's world and letting them know it's okay to tell you. This sounds simple, but keep in mind that it's not so easy if the other person's perspective involves ways that you are hurting them or things that you disagree with. This technique is not about agreeing with the other person, it's about being open to understanding them. It's about allowing them to know that it's okay to share with you, even if the two of you disagree. It's letting them know you're in this mindset, this change of heart, and you're genuinely curious to understand. All right, so it's time to practice. Let's take a few minutes to do this group activity or individual activity. Use this example to practice using the disarming statement, thought and feeling empathy, and an inquiry. Now, in this scenario, let's say that you have a close friend who is stating this to you. And remember, what you might want to do is hear what this friend has to say and think, well, that's not true. I think I can help them, and jump into trying to fix their problem. What we're going to do is try to practice using empathy instead. So, in the scenario, your friend says, my boss hates me. Everything I do is wrong. She's on me about what I wear. She expects more from me than anyone else. Every time I finish a project, I have to redo it. So go ahead and press pause and give the empathy a try. And then when you're ready, hit play again. All right, welcome back. So I've got a potential reply for you. What you might want to do, even before you look at this, is hit pause again, look at your reply, and ask yourself, do I have my disarming statement in there? Do I have my thought and feeling empathy? Do I have an inquiry in there? Does it feel like a good flow and genuine? So here's a potential reply. You could say something like, wow, it sounds like you and your boss really don't get along. She's on you for what you wear. She has higher expectations of you than others. She makes you redo your work. I can imagine how frustrating that is. Probably feels unfair, maybe even like she doesn't respect you. I'm feeling frustrated with you right now. What else is she doing that's frustrating you? So you can see the different elements in there. I actually even added a little bit of a I feel statement, which was jumping ahead a little bit, but it's got all those elements of empathy just in trying to understand what the other person is going through. So being assertive with how we feel can be really challenging. Most of us don't like to share our own feelings. We prefer to share our perspective. But if we share our perspective, the dialogue tends to become a debate. Our goal is deeper understanding. So being assertive in this context is about sharing our feelings, not our opinion. It's hard to avoid being defensive in this step. You will want to shift the focus to how you feel rather than maybe what the other person should be doing or what you think or defending your own perspective or what you've done. You want to try to avoid you statements and stay focused on your own feelings. It's okay to share some vulnerability here. By acknowledging some imperfection, it can actually foster a deeper connection. For example, you could say something like, I'm feeling really sad right now and a little bit frustrated with myself. That's a really powerful thing to share with somebody. The fifth and final step is to have a statement of respect. It's important that the other person feel cared for and appreciated. Adding a compliment or a statement of what they mean to you is really, really helpful. You can say something complimentary or share what the other person means to you. It can be something like, I know this is hard to talk about, but your friendship means a lot to me. Or something like, I really respect how direct you've been with me. Something like that, just to let them know this is a positive conversation and not something that's going to get in between the two of you. So let's try practicing one more time. This time we're going to use all three empathy pieces, an I feel statement and a respect statement. So we're going to try to bring the whole thing together. And once again, the only way to get this is to practice. And it's okay to make mistakes. We all do, and that's really how we learn. So the first example is, let's say, you're coming home late, and we'll use that same example as in the beginning where your spouse says, you're always late and I'm sick of waiting for you. In the second one, let's use an example. Let's say this is a child, and the child is stating that, no one in this family cares about me anymore. You never call, you don't check in on me to see if I'm okay. It's like I don't even exist. So a couple of kind of real life potential examples that we're going to just kind of see where these take us. So go ahead and pause and try to use all 5 steps. And then when you're ready, go ahead and press play again. All right, so I've got a couple of potential replies, though yours may be much different and yours may be much, much better, and that is awesome. I hope you had kind of some fun with this and some good practice. So here's one of the potential replies for the first one. You may say something like, it's true, I am late, and you have a right to be angry. You're here waiting for me after work every day, and it's not fair. It makes me frustrated and sad that we don't spend more time together. Maybe we should talk more about this because I love you and I care about how you feel. The second one was once again the child saying, nobody in this family reaches out or cares for me. So you might try something like, once again, our insides might be saying, how could you say that? I love you. We do this and you don't call me back. And you want to get into this defense and argument about it. And that's not going to help that person feel any better. It's not going to help you feel any better. It's not going to help you connect. So this is a way to try to get that understanding before trying to solve any kind of problem. So you might respond with something like, you're right. We don't talk like we used to. It feels like you don't exist and that we never check in on you. That must feel really lonely. It breaks my heart to see that you feel this way. How long have you felt this way? It's so brave for you to bring this up. So that's just a way to respond in a way that you're trying to understand, and you're acknowledging how he feels and you're letting him know how you feel about it. So to kind of pull all this together, once again, these are the 5 secrets of effective communication. You can leave this on the screen and practice with as many different scenarios as you can think of. As I said in the beginning, the hardest part is shifting your mindset and entering a situation with compassion and respect, even if it's not deserved, if it's not reciprocated. One last thought. This tool is not passive. It's not about giving in or being submissive. It's simply about creating understanding. It's taking that really difficult step that we often skip because it's difficult and it's not what comes naturally to us. In the course resources, you can find this relationship journal. You can use it to analyze how effective your responses are and work to improve your skills. Use the journal to capture what the other person said, how you responded, and then see if you used good communication, and if not, what were those consequences to that? And then lastly, how could you have responded differently using good communication? And, if it's appropriate, try to go back into that conversation with somebody and use that good communication and see what happens. Thank you for taking the time to learn with me today. I hope you find this tool effective and life changing, as I have. For more resources like blogs, books, and links, please explore my website. It's www.chrisguznicekcounseling.com.